Hello and welcome back to another codepro tutorial. So are you tired of buggy code, of your boss emailing you or calling you on a Friday night asking why something is blowing up in production? Are you tired of sleepless nights wondering if some solution that you implemented is going to work under all these different scenarios, and that you wish there is a magic secret formula that you could use to make all of your bugs and all of your problems go away? Well, let me tell you a little secret. There isn't one, but there is UI testing. And in this tutorial, we are going to go over some introductory concepts of how we can use UI testing in our apps to automate a lot of the manual testing, improve the stability of our apps, and reduce bugs. If you're a new iOS developer looking for a great beginner's course, make sure you check out my iOS beginner's course, available on both Skillshare and on Udemy. It's great for beginners. You can sign up with my links down below in the description and get the course for 50% off or 2 months of Skillshare Premium for free. Also, make sure to follow me on Patreon. I will be posting more premium content on there that will be for patrons only. So let's open up Xcode and get started. All right, so for UI testing, so we're going to start basically with a starter project, and this project is going to contain an app that looks like this. It's kind of like Apple Music meets Spotify, and it's just a joke, but you know. So we want to basically construct UI tests for this really simple user interface, and we want to do it for the login section in here. We want to find a way to basically perform some UI tests that can automate logging in for us and verifying that certain things are passing our tests, right? And so that's what we're going to do. The code for this app has already been written. And so if you head on over to my GitHub page, the codepro / iOS UI testing tutorial, you'll find the repository there, and you can clone it and start off with the starter project that I have rather than having to write all this code from scratch. We don't want to do that. Just a caveat, I am using the Xcode 10 GM, so if you're trying to build this on Xcode 9, you may run into problems. So just a heads up, you may want to be on the 10 GM for this one. All right, so let's just take a look at what this app does. It's really basic, and everything in the code is fake. It's all just mocked out, really. So you've got a couple of rows here in a static table view, and they don't do anything, but we have this profile button, and we come in here and we can perform a login, right? So there obviously is a valid set of credentials that I've hard-coded just for the testing purposes. So if I go through an invalid login flow, right, and I hit login, I get an error message saying, you know, invalid username, right? And there's a little spinner here and some status text. And if I put in a valid login and log in again, let's see what happens here. And so you can see that there's already some quirky things going on. But now that we're logged in, we have a new section available, right? So we have something called like My Downloads. So, you know, maybe something that is going to be specific to a user profile that's hidden until you log in. And this doesn't do anything. It just adds or basically unhides a row that was hidden before. Okay, so we need to actually add the test target to the project, because right now, if you go into the project, which is called UI Testing Tutorial, and you go down to the targets, there's only one target here. So generally when you create a project, you'll be prompted to also create the unit test target and the UI test target optionally if you want to do that. So I didn't do that, and that's why we'll have to do this manually. But if you hit the plus icon, we can bring up our new targets, and if we scroll down here to the test selection. So I'm sure you've seen the unit testing bundle, and you may have seen the UI testing bundle, and this is also where we would add it. So what we'll select here is UI testing bundle and hit next, and hit finish, and you can, I'm going to do it in Swift, but you can also pick Objective-C if you choose to do so. And now we have our separate target here for UI testing tutorial UI tests. So if we go down here, let's just take a look at what gets generated for us. And you can see here that it's just a very basic test case that we need to go ahead and fill in. Now let's kind of compare and contrast unit testing versus UI testing. So you've probably heard of or have interacted with unit testing before, and that's much more granular. You're testing very small pieces of your code, kind of unit by unit, hence the name, and verifying that things work under all kinds of different sets of criteria, edge cases, and whatnot. But with UI testing, we're not really caring about how to test our network service layer or things or components inside of it, it's more black box. It's more approaching things from the mindset of, I am a user using this app. I enter in my username and password and hit login, and I wait, and eventually I'm brought to the next screen of the app, and or not, right? It failed for various reasons, and I'm stuck at the login screen with an error message. So that's kind of the mindset here. We're going to approach this more from an automation point of view, where when we write our tests, we can automate a lot of these flows. We can automate a login flow success. We can automate a login flow failure, and then we can kind of simulate what we want to happen. We can run assertions to make sure that certain UI components are visible when they should be, or not visible when they should not be visible. And so those are a lot of the things that we can control here. But it's important to understand that we are not testing the low-level pieces of our code. We are testing the higher-level interactions with a lot of these tests. So what we'll do is construct 3 tests that cover a few different things, just to give you an idea for how you can use this and apply these concepts in your apps. All right, so we can start by deleting this test example code here, because we're going to just use our own. And before we write our code, let's just look at that login view controller real fast. So you can see here that if we look at the login function, we do some validation on the username and password, and we set a key to true for logged in on success, and basically wait for 3 seconds to simulate the loading of a login, and then finally dismiss this entire view controller and go back to the main view controller. The credentials are hard-coded in just for the sake of ease, and so that's what this login screen is expecting to get from the test. So if we go back over to the UI test file, what we can do here is we're going to create a test called test valid login success, right? So func test valid login success. Oh, and one other thing you want to check out for, make sure your scheme for your UI tests is here. I added mine and it wasn't, so I had to actually go to new scheme and make sure the target was the UI testing tutorial UI test. So if you're having that problem, you can just go here and add it manually like I did. When you do that, just make sure your actual application target is selected when you record and run the tests. So like I just said, we actually record tests to capture a lot of test information. So there's this little record button down here, and if you hit it, it's going to build your app and run it. So this is pretty interesting, because now if you watch here, I click profile button, right? And code's being automatically generated for me by the test. So if we go here and we look for, so we're testing valid login, right? So I tap into the username field, I type my valid username, I type my valid password, and you can see that as I type, code's automatically being generated for me from the test. And then I hit login. And we wait here, and we can see that the downloads cell is available. And if I click on the cell, you can see that it's also showing down here in the test code. And so that's the execution path I want just for this test. Now I can go ahead and hit the stop button. And so you might be thinking, okay, well, what does all this mean and how does it work? Because it's all this looks like junk. And kind of the way it works is the UI testing framework plugs into accessibility, or the accessibility framework, and it can read lots of the static text and labels and descriptions of UI elements on the screen like it's doing here. And then it can infer things like static text or buttons and secure text fields. And so we can query against a lot of these things to write our assertions. So this code is good, but it's not really going to be valid for testing purposes. So what we want to do is set it up so that we can use it. So now that we have that, we can start doing stuff like this. So we can start with our let valid password equals abc123. Let valid username equals codepro. And let me see here, we have our actual application. So this is fine. This is what kind of triggers everything. And so we need to simulate the tap to get to the profile. So what we can do here is we can leave this as is. That's fine. That just gets us to the screen. We can do another thing here. So we can delete the tap there, and we can do a let username text field equals app.textfields username. And we can then do username text field dot tap. One thing you got to watch out for, because you can fail your UI tests on the simulator, is you need to make sure that under the simulator with it selected, where was it? Oh yeah, if you go under hardware and you go down to keyboard, you want to make sure your toggle software keyboard is turned on, because that lets your keyboard get focus like it would on a real iOS device. So if you run into any issues there, Command K is what's going to do that for you. And so now that we've done that, so we hit the tap gets focus, makes it become the first responder in the chain. We can then do another thing like username text field dot set, where's it, type text, and we'll type in the valid username. So we got that part down, and then we go down here, and so we're doing the same thing on the password here. So let password text field equals that, remove the dot tap so we can perform that action kind of separately here. So we do password text field dot tap to get focus so that it becomes the first responder, and we do password text field dot type text valid password. And so so far so good. Now, one other thing we can also do here is, how do we make assertions? How do we make sure that something is visible? So there, on all of these elements, there is a .exists property, which means that the element is visible. So along the way, we can start adding assertions. We can assert true that the password text field exists. If it doesn't, if it's hidden, something goes wrong, we'll fail the test right here. So we can start baking in lots of those little things along the way. We can do the same thing for the username field. So xct assert true username text field dot exists. And if we fail, then we'll catch it there as well. So we're good there. We got focus. We added in the password. Now we've got the login button dot tap, and at this point, it's going to do the login, and it's going to go back to the other screen. Now let's try something. Let's try this as is. So what I want to do is I don't need the tap on the downloads because I just needed to get access to the name of it. So let downloads cell equals that, and let's do something xct true downloads cell dot exists. Okay. Now let's run this real fast and see what we get. All right, so my test is running. Let's see what we got. So something failed. Uh-oh. So let's see what's going on here. xct true, sorry, true failed. So why did it fail? Well, it may be something to do with the timing of when the login screen is dismissed, because you notice this happens right away. But in reality, what's happening in the login screen here is there is a slight delay of 3 seconds before it stops animating this and dismisses. So how do we account for that? Well, it's really not that complicated. What we can do is we can create an expectation for that. So right before we do that assertion, let's do something here. We'll do expectation, and you can see that there's one that takes in a predicate and evaluates something and has a handler. So that's the one we're going to use. And for the predicate, what we want to do is create a predicate that looks like this. This predicate. So we can do one where exists equals 1, and we can evaluate something. And the something is going to be, in this case, download cell. And for the handler, I'm not going to use it, so I'm just going to pass in nil. And then right below that, we're going to do a wait for expectations with a timeout. Now, I'm going to give this 5 seconds just to be safe, because there was a 3-second delay, and I don't want to do it too close where it could fail. And for my handler here, I will also use nil, pass in nil. And let's go ahead and run this again with the expectation there that's doing the assertion for us. And so you can see that that test just succeeded, right? So it needed a little bit of time there to actually dismiss the screen and assert that that cell is visible now. And so in real life testing, that just may be something you have to deal with, right? Maybe your web services take some time. You'll need to, give it a little bit of time to respond, and if it fails completely, then okay, there may be something going on that's wrong, right? So that's our success test. Now let's go ahead and test one of the invalid login credentials cases. All right, so our next test is going to be a little bit simpler. So what we'll do is create another one. So func test invalid login, missing credentials alert is shown. So that's the expected outcome for testing our invalid login, is we should see that pop up. Now let's start recording the test. So it's real simple. We'll end up going to profile and just hitting, maybe just doing something and hitting login. And we've got this missing credentials, missing username or password, and that's it. So now you can see that we've generated some code here in our test. Let's see if we can clean this up so that we can run our assertions against it. So we've got our app. We have the way to get in here. We're tapping on username. We're tapping on login. And let's see here. So this is where we can break it up. So let's say we want to let the alert dialog equals that, and I'm just going to take the buttons off here, and we'll do an XCT assert true on alert dialog dot exists. And after the assertion, what we can do is call alert dialog dot buttons dot OK dot tap if we want to dismiss that, and then that can be our test. So it can be that simple. Now let's run it again. And so our test passes. Now, if you want to test your test and make sure that what you're actually doing makes sense, what you can do is if we go over to login view controller and we go down to the present alert method, let's just comment out everything in here. Go back to the test. So let's just say someone makes a change to the project, right? Like someone changes how the alert handling is implemented, but never updates the test. So then you go to run your test before you make a release of the app, and you're going to basically fail this assertion because now you're no longer showing an alert, but you still have code here that is trying to execute that path. And so you can see my test just failed because it doesn't exist. It's commented out and it was never shown. So that's just one way you can kind of sanity test your tests. Now I've got one more test to write here. So go ahead and do func test invalid login progress spinner is hidden. Now, actually, I know that this behavior doesn't work that way. It actually shows. So there's already a bug in the code here intentionally to show us how we can correct it and use the test basically to kind of identify problems in our actual app code. And so let's just start with our constants here. I'm just going to copy our credentials from the other test and paste those back up top. I do need an invalid one, so I'm just going to do invalid password because I need to simulate the invalid path. And now at this point, I can start recording. So let's record this test. And so we go to Profile, and we go hit Login, and OK to dismiss. And so this thing is still spinning. It shouldn't be spinning. We don't want it to spin. But how do I access it in here, right? Because it's not something I interact with. So you can actually click on these elements, and because of how the UI testing framework plugs into accessibility, it can find it. So it found app.activityIndicators in progress.tap. So we can use this to basically query and assert that it exists or it is hidden or things like that. So really, we have everything we need now to construct our test here. So let's go ahead and just dismiss this and stop recording and start writing our test logic. Okay, so we actually don't need this one here. I think I tapped something else on the screen that generated that. We just need everything up to this point. So let's take a look at what's going on here. We have our, let's see, our application. Actually, I don't even need my, I just realized I don't even need these. That's fine. So we tap our login button here, and we have our missing credentials. So what we can do here is let alert. Actually, no, that's fine. We dismiss it, and what we really want to do here is check this. So the in progress spinner. So let activity indicator view equals app.activityIndicators in progress. And we don't want to tap it. I just used the tap so that the test could generate it for me so I could figure out what it was called, which is this here. Now, what we really want it to do is not to be present, right? So what I can do here is xct assert activity indicator view dot, let's see here. Exists, actually no, false. Right, and I don't need these here. Now, in order to actually fix that, what I need to do is go back into the login view controller, because if I run this code right now, it's still going to fail. I haven't actually made an implementation change to hide that. So if we go back into our login view controller here, let's see how we can fix that. So login says start animating for the spinner. And we go through these checks here where we present the alert. Now, we never call stop animating at any point, so it's still spinning. And we only call stop animating on a successful login. So if we want to fix that, we can do really one of two things. We can put it inside of every guard check before we present the alert, or we could put it in the present alert itself. So let me, just for the sake of simplicity, I will put it there, even though it should probably be present error instead of alert. So it makes more sense to stop it in this context, but that's okay. So stop animating. Right. And actually, if you scroll up here, I have a hides when stopped property set to true on the loading activity indicator. So that is one other caveat to consider here. Let's go ahead and run the test. Okay, and you can see that test succeeded because when I call stop animating, it will automatically hide the activity indicator, which would then pass the exists check. And so that pretty much wraps everything up for this tutorial. One other thing I wanted to touch on is there is this continue after failure property that's set to false. Just like the comment says, it's usually best to stop immediately when a failure occurs. So you could set that to true if you want to. But if you want to let the tests continue to flow after a failure, you can do that and just look at the test logs at the end and see what passed and failed. Now, if you want to run everything all at once and automate the entire flow, you can go up to the class level and hit the play icon here, and then that's going to run all 3 of our tests. So now this is really great because now we can automate a lot of manual testing that we may have had to do ourselves, right? So, let's say we're making really big changes to the app. We're refactoring things and changing the underlying implementation of things. Well, if we have a suite of tests on hand like this ready to go that can test a lot of these paths, then we can save ourselves and even QA people a lot of time because these can already be scripted, ready to go, and they test existing flows, and all you have to do is play them, run them all, and see what happens when you make big changes underneath the hood. And so that saves a lot of time, catches a lot of bugs in development, and it's really valuable to consider adding these in along your development flow. So maybe you finish a view controller, and in addition to your unit tests, you start creating the UI tests to hit the high-level overview of things like inputs and expected transitions and all the things that are kind of at that level. And that wraps up this tutorial. So hopefully now you have more tools in your toolbox that you can use as you develop your apps. Now that you have UI testing at your disposal, you can automate a lot of that manual testing flow. It'll save you time and money, your company time and money, testers time and money. So it's really valuable, and you can cover pretty much your entire app using these techniques and really catch things in the beginning, hopefully before they go out to production. So if you like this tutorial, you know what to do. Smash that like button. Make sure you subscribe to CodePro to stay up to date for all the latest tutorials. Also make sure to follow me on social media. You can find me on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Patreon. And if you follow me on Patreon, I will be posting more premium content on there coming up soon for Patreon supporters only, so make sure you check that out. So let me know in the comment section down below what tutorial you guys would like to see next, and thank you so much for stopping by. I will catch you in the next one.